worthy of that role.
All right, there we go. We're on. Hey, everybody, it's MP. I am once again joined. I'm not joined by the lovely Claire. I got Calum and DJ.
The lovely Calum and DJ.
The lovely Calum and DJ.
The lovely Calum, especially.
Extremely sexy and enchanting. This is our, Season 7, Episode 1 Dragonstone review. Gentlemen, if you want to introduce yourselves. Calum, you go first.
Yeah, so I'm Calum. Not really much interesting about me. Law student in the UK. Got quite a small YouTube channel that's dedicated to Game of Thrones. And other than that, I'm really excited to be here and talk about the first episode of this season.
Thank you. DJ?
Yep, I'm DJ. Also not much interesting about me. I'm a computer guru in Massachusetts, the United States. But
computer issues.
I think I've got some really cool stuff to talk about in this episode. So,
way to go. So where do you want to start with, Arya?
Let's take the scenes in order of how they occurred on screen. I think that's the easiest way to go about it.
Agreed.
You can whoever wants to start. Well, I scroll back for my notes here.
Yeah, I can go first on this one if no one has any objections. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's one sort of the main theory that I wanted to sort of go over for this episode, for this scene, was that the face that Arya used to kill Walder was actually the same face of the waitress from the feast directly following the retaking of Riverrun at the Twins. And so based on that, my theory is that Arya, in fact, spent a few weeks, if not more, working at the Twins, because I don't feel as though Arya would have any reason to kill that waitress in particular. As we've seen from this scene, she seems to still have her morals, as evidenced by the fact that she spared the life of the waitress. Although some people could argue that she only did that to so that someone could carry her message. However, I do believe that she still has some sort of moral code, and because of that, I don't think that she killed that girl and took her face. I think that face was taken from probably the House of Black and White, and then she used it to sort of disguise herself as a maid in the Twins. And I think she did this for a few main reasons. Firstly, I think she did it to sort of ingratiate herself into the Twins so that she didn't look out of place. Secondly, to sort of gather information, which she could use to formulate the best assassination possible. And then finally, to have the ability to enter the kitchen and create the pie that we saw served without sort of arousing suspicion. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a really interesting point, because it shows that she's using what Jaqen taught her while carrying out her own assassinations. So if you remember back to, I think it was season 2, where Jaqen helps her escape from Harrenhal, you'll notice that he knew the exact time of day when the escape would be most successful. He knew where the guards would be posted. He knew the best way to kill the guards. And I feel as though he had that information because he'd spent a decent amount of time at Harrenhal, and he used that time to formulate that information in order to carry out the assassination and help them escape. And so I think Arya did that in the same light, whereas instead of obviously being at Harrenhal, she used her time at the Twins to help build sort of a profile of Walder so that she could carry out the most succinct and sort of discreet assassination possible.
Yeah, I really like that. It also sort of brings to mind who, like you're saying, she's formulating a plan, but she's also gathering information on perhaps the right people to kill, people that she knows were involved. And they make a point of showing her say that speech, right? Like, you are all the guys that were here that did this, murdered a unborn child in her mother's stomach and killed Kat and yada, yada, yada. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Sorry though, what episode did you say that was when we see the waitress? I'm going to have to go back and look at that.
Yeah, it was season 6, episode 10, where Bronn and Jaime are attending a feast at the Twins.
Okay. Yeah.
She keeps giving Jaime the eyes.
Yeah.
And Bronn makes a note of it, saying that one seems to like you, basically.
I think another piece of evidence for this is the fact that Bronn went to bed with two waitresses as opposed to just her, which gives sort of room for her to be able to like sort of scurry out of the way and allow the other waitress to
Take
sleep
over.
with Bronn as opposed to herself. Whereas if it was just her, that may bring into question whether or not it really was Arya. But I do think that it makes sense for it to be Arya because she needed time to, as I said before, ingratiate herself into the household and sort of learn the positioning of Walder and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. DJ, you got anything?
Yeah, I would just say that, and I know there's some contention about this, and we can go over it on the second Arya scene where she's at the campground when we get to that. But I think that what we're seeing is that Arya's story won't be, I don't want to say not quite as dark, because I think it's dark no matter how you look at it, but that she's not going to be quite as indiscriminately killing as we maybe previously thought. And I almost see a role reversal between her and Sansa. Sansa seems to be getting more and more cold-hearted in a way, whereas Arya seems to be sort of returning to some form of normalcy. So
very good point. It's also like her and the Hound, right? Beforehand, when she was traveling with the Hound, they sort of switch roles. She ends up coming towards the light, and she goes dark at the end of that when they separate. So they had that same sort of switch. So Sansa's definitely going towards a darker path.
Could you also potentially, although this sort of goes against the grain of what you've just said, could you also potentially argue that there's sort of a similarity between this Arya scene and Lady Stoneheart in the books, in the sense that Lady Stoneheart is seen in the books to be killing Freys regardless of whether or not they were potentially like directly involved in the Red Wedding, and it brought into question sort of whether this was moral or whether this was right in the sense that they weren't actually like responsible for the wedding, yet she is still mercilessly killing them. You could argue, someone may argue that Arya is actually doing a similar thing in the sense that she essentially mass exterminated all of the Freys without potentially understanding the severity without potentially understanding how far each individual Frey went with regards to actually carrying out the Red Wedding. So
I would say that would be true, except like MP mentioned, she specifically says all of you were involved in some way, and I wish I wrote down the exact quote, but it's almost like they went out of their way to say something like, all the people gathered here are people who were involved.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I think she did the research.
We get the basic sin that the Freys committed, which was a sin of guest right, which is a huge sin there. So the fact that they did that, she sort of has a reason aside from herself. Just they went against the laws of the realm, and maybe she's even punishing them for that. Like I think it's going to be interesting to see next season if those Lannisters are dead or they're just
next episode.
Yeah,
that's what I'm waiting for too.
Yeah.
One last point on this scene, unless of course you guys have anything else to say, which is that I'm unsure whether or not the waitress actually carried out the message that Arya wanted her to, because I know we're going to go on to this scene later in more depth, but if you fast forward to the scene in which Cersei is talking to Jaime seems to not really understand who carried out the murder, because he says something along the lines of whoever killed the Freys are no friends of ours. And so that would imply that the waitress did not actually carry out the message that Arya intended.
By the way, I don't think that was a waitress. That might have been, who knows, either Walder's new wife or one of his daughters.
Sorry, I was getting mixed up with Arya being the waitress from that was a Frey.
Yeah, the wife. I'm pretty sure it was his wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to know, but maybe it's just taken time to get that information. Like maybe she's told a few women folk that she went and saw, but the word hasn't reached them yet. I can't see them not having her tell it and that not spreading around the realm sooner or later. But I mean, I don't know. It's moot, I guess.
The one other thing I would bring up, and this is sort of just out of humor, and I mentioned it to you guys before, was I want to know if anybody has evidence as to what Arbor Gold refers to. Like, does it refer to whether it's white wine, or does it just refer to the quality of the wine? Because when she said we have Arbor Gold and then they poured red wine, I was under the impression Arbor Gold was a white wine. But Calum brought up a good point when we talked last time about maybe that's just referring to the quality of the
quality,
wine.
yeah.
So, but I'm just wondering if maybe if some commenters
have
have
we
some
ever
evidence.
Googled it?
I've looked around. I wouldn't say I did it extensively, but I did look around to see what I could find, and couldn't find any confirmation on the color of the wine or anything like that. So, but I just thought it was a funny.
It just says the island produces both sweet and dry red wines as well as white wines, comma, the most well-known of which is called Arbor Gold. But is that the white wine, or is
or is that just wine in general? Right. It's hard to say, but I like to think that it's white wine and that they just made a stupid mistake in this show.
Why not? Sure. They needed something to represent blood.
Yeah, exactly.
Have some sort of blood in that scene when everybody's just getting.
Not to mention, if we're under the impression that maybe the poison that was used is the same one Maester Crescent used, because he put it into, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong, but he put it into red wine because the color of the poison, like the gem they use, is like similar to the color of red wine, I think. So it hides it better. So that might be another reason they went for the red rather than a white.
Yeah, I was thinking, I wonder how much poison she needed to put into that keg. I guess you would call it a keg of wine, probably. Cask, yeah. The only other note that I'll have to add, which isn't anything, but and it's hard to say because it's actually the actor who plays Walder Frey, but Arya apparently does a great job of acting when she's in people's bodies because she had his mannerisms down perfect. So what's next?
I believe the next scene is the north. So we have the White Walkers followed by Bran and Ed.
I know DJ has some great thoughts on this.
Yeah, let me kick off a couple things with this. The first thing I noted was obviously, it's hard not to notice the giant cloud surrounding the White Walkers as they're marching forward. And I thought maybe it was a nod to whether they bring the cold or the cold brings them. And it seems like in some way, at least, they're bringing some form of cold with them, that cloud. That would be the first thing I noted.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I think we also saw it at Hardhome as well, right? Like the cloud sort of came over the mountains and poured down beforehand.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would definitely argue that the White Walkers bring the cold as opposed to the cold brings the White Walkers.
And then the next thing, I will actually do the screen share here. So hang on one sec. All right. So this is what we see with a normal white. This is from Hardhome. And the reason I wanted to start with this is so you can have a baseline for what a white's eye looks like. In past, it's even more distinct, but there's a clear blue with a dark pupil in the center of the eye. And we caught a screenshot of the giant here. And it's pretty obvious the difference here, that there is no pupil in the center of the eye, and that the blue appears to be cloudier. And right after this giant walks off screen, we can see this shot. And I think that what they're going for here is that Bran was actually skin changed into that giant. So he now, and that would be the first time we see anything like that. So it appears that Bran, not even through werewoods or anything, now has the ability to jump, a pretty great distance into the body of something he's maybe even never seen before. And it appears he may be scrying through that giant's eye. So I thought that was kind of an interesting.
I think that's really significant in the sense that it's showing the extent to which Bran possesses the power of warging, because, as you say, we've never seen a warg take the form of something that he can't physically see. So obviously the main examples of this being when Bran warged into Hodor or whatever else, the warg is always within vision of the thing that he's warging into, unless I'm missing something, in which please bring it up. if that is the case, then it really does show how powerful Bran is becoming.
In the books, I think the warging can be further away, at least with the wolves. Actual warging, be careful, people get mad at you. It's skin changing. Yep. It's only warging when it's wolves.
Oh shit. My bad.
I use the proper verb.
No. I always say warg too because
yeah, it's convenient, and the show calls it warging. I don't even know if they ever mentioned skin changing, not off the top of my head, but I think they just refer all of it to warging. But yeah, I think the wolves are different. The wolves, I think, have some different connection with them in the books. Arya is able to, and we think have wolf dreams and possibly warg from another continent. So
yeah, for sure.
But that might be something different. This might be a power that Bran has specifically.
No, I agree. I also think like it was hard for me because I always assumed that the reason they had us Bran warg Hodor was because he was simple-minded. But now I'm all screwed up because when he originally did it, Hodor or Willis had all his faculties together. See, I always thought it was easier for him to get into Hodor's head because he was simple-minded.
Mm-hmm.
But now that's all screwed up. But the Giants, I always figured that Bran would warg away at some point just because they don't have much going on in their minds anymore, so it's going to be easy access. So that also might play a part, though.
That's a great point.
Easy access.
Yeah. One thing I will say on that is, despite the fact that the evidence you showed is compelling, one thing I would say is that it seems as though that Bran was, if he was skin changing into the Giant, it seems as though he was more of a passenger as opposed to the pilot.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything that suggested to me that Bran was in control of the Giant. He wasn't doing anything that any of the other whites weren't also doing. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, actually, that brings up a good point too, because you would think that if he could control it, he could just take a Giant and start murdering those all the whites around him.
So yeah, for sure. Why not
causing
chaos? At it?
But
just jump from Giant to Giant and person to person.
Exactly.
Kill the army before they get.
It would at least delay them, if nothing else.
Now, this might not. I'm thinking this might not be the case in the book. Maybe at least not yet that he has this ability, because that would be pretty crazy. But I do think that either way, it's pointing towards, and I know this. I'm sure this has had to have been said elsewhere too, that Bran seems to be coming almost godlike, and possibly, I mean, the only evidence of anything really godlike that we have. I mean, we have people coming back from the dead, but just because you pray to R'hllor and the guy comes back does not mean R'hllor brought the person back. So it's this is clear evidence we have of somebody with godlike powers.
Yeah.
We were sorry, go ahead, Calum.
I was just going to quickly say that the point DJ made about just because you're praying to R'hllor, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's R'hllor that's answering. Is I think quite a clear example of confirmation bias that we're seeing. That's all I wanted to say. So, if
there is more than one god or multiple gods, like the Great Other and the Fire God, R'hllor, Lord of Light, whatever you want to call him, I feel like Bran and Brynden, which is interesting in itself. You got Brandon and Brynden.
And Bloodraven, you mean, right? By Brynden?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
His real name's Brynden. Very similar names, right? For some odd reason, Brandon, Brynden. But I feel like I think they cycle over each other. Like, so say Brandon the Builder way back when went in there, and then there was a Brynden maybe for the Fireside that came in, they won, and they just sort of pass back and forth in this. I don't know if they're against each other or if they're keeping balance or trying to keep balance in the world. I don't know. This is completely crackpot too. It's just odd to me that one's a Targaryen and one's a Stark, right?
Ice and fire.
Yeah, you got the ice and fire.
They got the duality thing going for sure.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of all I got. I don't have much. I mean, I think DJ's, when he first told me about the Blue-Eyed Giant and Bran warging him, I was like, that's an amazing idea. And then I went back and watched it and tried to challenge you say, no, that's a blue eye. He's not, but you came back and proved me right, like, or wrong, it's got no pupil. So I think you're absolutely right. And yeah, I agree with you both too, that he's just a passenger. He's probably just in there silent. I don't even know if the giant would even feel him in there. But
I mean, that we don't know if the giant feels anything. We're not. I mean, I'm not certain if. Obviously, we know that White Walkers are cognitive beings, but I'm unsure if whites are also cognitive. They may just be sort of scourge, if you like.
Just a medium.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the older the being, right? The longer you've been dead, I think, is different. Because when they're fresh, like those whites that I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. I was talking to James about it at Small Council. But the ones that came back and attacked Jorah Mormont, in the books, I'm pretty certain that it says that they remember, like Jon saw intelligence in them still.
Or at least Jon thinks so, yeah.
Yeah, it's Jon's opinion of it. We don't know for a fact. You're absolutely right. Jon just thinks that.
Yeah.
I'm kind of taking that as he's right. But I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Something,
I mean,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that obviously with the books are written in sort of a first person narrative format, and so you can't always take
unreliable narrator.
Yeah, you can't always take what the opinions of each narrator as fact.
I absolutely agree.
But it's still interesting nonetheless.
One last thing about that scene at the wall with Bran that I noticed, and it's kind of cool. I think I forgot to mention it at Small Council, but the last shot you see, I know DJ has something in a little bit here maybe, but not Ed, but when Ed's looking out, you see the fire receding down the tunnel. It's almost like winter's coming and it's pushing the fire back.
Gotcha.
It's a very specific visual that they show. It's just the two flames going away further and further away. So I thought that was kind of cool.
I didn't catch that, but yeah, that's really cool. The only other note I have on this scene was, I think when Ed looks out, so after Bran and Mira and those guys all go into the tunnel, Ed looks back out to the north, and it looks like you can see the cloud that we saw around the White Walkers coming over, like rising over some kind of hill there. And I'm wondering just how close the White Walkers are, and if time is really getting limited here, how much time we have left.
See, I looked for that, and I couldn't actually see it myself. But I mean, I'm not doubting you. But there is sort of one argument against that, is what the Hound sees, right? And Eastwatch by the Sea, like they'd be at a different. But I mean, who knows what they're doing? They could be marching,
splitting it up,
freaking army at every castle, right? So who knows?
Yeah.
Which would actually be better for the Watch if they did do that.
Well, I was thinking
smaller force to deal with.
Later, I thought of this too. After, and when we get to the Hound scene, we'll talk more about some of this stuff. But that it's possible that the White Walkers are splitting up and sending a distraction towards the main, maybe Castle Black, so that they can sneak people or sneak whites around or get through the wall by Eastwatch by the Sea.
Yeah, there's also one other thing to mention, which is that we've had evidence to the fact that the visions in the flames are very much up for interpretation. With regards to obviously the most prominent example of this being when Melisandre saw victory in the flames. However, obviously she assumed that it was a victory for Stannis, whereas in actual fact it was a victory for Jon. And so with that in mind, I think it's hard to take what the characters deem to be true as actually true, especially when you've got the whole fire magic in play as well. It really does sort of put into question the reliability of what these people are saying, especially since we as viewers didn't actually see anything. We only saw the flame, and it was we only have what the Hound said to go on, as opposed to actually seeing something for ourselves.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting note there too. And I know we talked about this before last time we talked, but it seems interesting to me that the when you see things in the flames, it's the future, and when you use the weirwood trees, it's the past, as far as I know. Although somebody pointed out that Bran does see the future at one point. I forget exactly what they said, but Jojen also has the Farsight, which is a future thing, right? Like he sees things in advance or has the visions of things in advance. But he always said that they're never wrong. They always come true. But he interpreted his wrong too. Like he thought Bran and Rickon died, but really it was the whatchamacallit kids, right? So I think that's why he's bummed out when he's in the underneath the weirwood tree currently in the books. I know he's dead now, but I'm just wondering, like, if that's playing in his mind, like, holy shit, I was actually wrong about something where he never has been before.
I think it just brings into light the whole idea of seeing a scene happening without context, which is why I think that these scenes are so much open for interpretation, because the people are seeing something which to them is quite self-explanatory, but without the context, it's hard for them to actually fully understand what is actually being shown to them. So that's what I'd say on that regard.
We have that too with last season at the Tower of Joy, when Bran watches Ned fight Arthur Dayne and everything like that. He has been told this story that he believes his whole life, and then he sees it unfold in front of him, and he's like, well, that's not what I thought happened. This isn't right. Like, except he wasn't really told a lie. He just made it into something that it wasn't. I think also, like, the TOJ scene, I think that's still open for interpretation. Bran's looking at it one way and probably thinking what's happening, but he might be wrong. Sorry to go there.
No, I had one sort of, I guess it's probably going to end up just being a passing comment, and it's not necessarily North related, but then again, it isn't really any related. It's not related to any scene, and that's simply my sort of observation that, although I may be missing someone, so if I am, please pull me up. But my observation, which is that the North and the South are divided with regards to the gender of their rulers. So in the North, you have predominantly male rulers. So you have the Night King, Jon Snow, Ed, for example. And then as you move further south, you start having women in power. So obviously the Sand Snakes, Cersei, Dany, etc. And I think that's sort of an interesting observation that I've made. I'm not sure if there's any significance to it, but that is yet another divide between the North and the South.
Let me bring up just real quick, and this is just sort of riffing on that, the duality of the ice and fire. It seems like the ice regions seem to be held by men and the fire regions seem to be held by women. So there could be something in that as well.
Very true, but what's also interesting is, and maybe Calum, you're going for this, the North seems to be actually wanting to empower the women more, whereas the South, despite there being women rulers, kind of want to push the women down in general. I mean, we have Lyanna Mormont at least. And
actually, speaking of which, my first note on the Winterfell scene when they open with Jon, the first thing I wrote down was, I love Lyanna. I love that little girl's the best. Such a badass.
Yeah, she is. She plays the part perfectly. Absolutely perfect.
Should we, unless anyone has anything else to say on the Bran scene, should we move swiftly onto the scene at Winterfell?
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
You want to take the lead on this one, Dunk? Have you got anything?
No, keep going ahead, and I'll go off what you guys are saying.
Okay. So
not anything.
Okay. One particular point that I found to be quite interesting was another sort of parallel between the Westerosi universe and our universe, more specifically the Westerosi society and our society. So to sort of preface this idea, I want to give some history. So obviously, in I think it was November 1918, which was the Representation of the People Act, which started the UK on the path towards women's suffrage. And why that's interesting is because that obviously occurred directly following the conclusion of World War One, and obviously there's many reasons for women, like why women's suffrage took place. But one of the main ones, in my view, is because that when the men were fighting, like in the war, women had to step up and were allowed to step up to take on the roles that men predominantly in the past would have carried out. And so that's sort of paralleled in this scene with directly following the Battle of the Bastards. Jon seems to be putting the North on that path to universal suffrage, in the sense that he's sort of equalizing the sexes. And I thought that was a really nice parallel between our world and their world. Just again, namely with the fact that women's rights seem to be raised significantly following major warfare, and that was showed in the show.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's an amazing point, man.
100% agree. And we brought this up, and I'll just flash this real quick. Is the Rosie the Riveter, which was,
there's Rosie. Okay.
Which was I don't know if it was specifically United States, but certainly North America, was when women had to start doing some of the even the factory jobs while men were off fighting and everything. And like you said, this led to a lot of the suffragette movement.
Barr has that poster in her background in her videos. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, I mean it's honestly it's a great tool for empowerment of women, and
absolutely.
And a lot of statistics and data show that the empowerment of women leads to huge progress in societies for the good. So
why wouldn't it?
I think we're stepping in the right direction in Westeros here.
Yes, at least in the north.
It's interesting that the sort of the oxymoron of the most traditional aspects of Westeros seem to be moving quickly towards modern societal values, whereas the more modern aspects of Westeros society seem to be degrading further and further into like the abyss of inequality.
Sure. I'm stuck back. I'm just thinking about the South again, and you're so spot on with the women rules. I even forgot, like Olenna, she's down there too. It's just like rampant with the women in the South actually running shit. It's kind of cool. I wonder what they're playing with there.
Actually too, with the Frey, all the Frey men dead, we'll probably get Frey's taking that over as well.
Sure. I mean, there was the point in the North way back when House Stark was almost dead, and it was the women that brought it back to fruition. Yeah. But that was out of necessity more than more than choice.
And I believe, doesn't George R. R. Martin self-identify as a feminist?
Probably
he does, right?
I would absolutely.
I think it's a huge part of his mentality when he approaches this, So
I think you have to be, for
sure. You mind if I make a point on this
Winterfell
scene?
No,
so
do not.
The next thing I have, moving on from what MP is doing, the next thing I have, which I thought was really cool, is I thought of this. So Jon says, "I'm not the king of the wildlings," before he introduces the idea that he would send the wildlings up to the wall. And Tormund makes a note saying, we'll be the Night's Watch, whatever. And I thought what was really interesting about this is if you consider it, wildlings would actually make the perfect Night's Watch, because they don't kneel, and the Night's Watch should not kneel, right? The Night's Watch does not owe allegiance to any particular political party or king. And so I think that wildlings really would be the best Night's Watch you could get.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
That's a fucking fantastic point.
Fabulous point. Yeah. And that's actually what he says is, looks like we're the Night's Watch now. And I think you're probably right there. He's definitely going to, in the end, if that wall's still, I think the wall, it has to come down, but it's going to get put back.
There's been sort of a theme of irony in this episode, hasn't there? You've got the irony of the wildlings becoming the Night's Watch, which is just obviously self-explanatory.
Sure.
But then you've also got in a later scene, you've got the Hound sort of succumbing to the powers of the fire, if you like, whereas he's obviously being at war with the Fire. Similarly, the Wildlings have been at war with the Night's Watch, and yet they seem to be coming together in that sense, which is I think ironic. But yeah.
Sorry, I'm seeing Alanis Morissette now.
Oh, you mean that song where she lists everything that is not ironic?
Yes, which makes the song completely ironic.
Yes, exactly. The song itself is ironic. Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add to the wild?
No, that's actually a very good point, Calum, too. And I'm usually really good with themes. I forgot to look for them in this episode. I thought I found one, but now I can't remember it for the life of me. But definitely was an irony, but I can totally see what you're going for. Yeah. Oh, and irony, too, that, well, are we about to go to Winterfell?
We're still on Winterfell here.
We still need to discuss the scene in which following the scene at the Great Hall where Jon.
I actually have more on the Great Hall. Just for
okay, sorry. Yep, go.
And I had mentioned this to you. This just kind of bugged me a little bit. Is why Royce, a Lord of the Vale, gave a shit what happened to the Umber and Karstark castles. I don't know if they just needed to throw him a speaking line, but for some reason, instead of someone from the North bringing up the fact that Umber and Karstark, betrayed the North, for some reason they had a Royce do it. It's just a little bit of a complaint, not a huge deal, but I wanted to throw it out there.
I guess I do completely agree with you, but just to play devil's advocate, the one potential saving grace with respect to that would be that he sort of pledged his men to fight against those families, and he very likely lost men from the Knights of the Vale during that battle. Although it did seem quite decisive, I'm sure that one or two of them may have died, and they are in fact his men. They are in fact his men that he's sort of ordered to battle, and in that sense,
Sure.
He would have a potential reason. But I do agree with you that it is kind of.
And counter argued. That was a great argument. We can see why you're a lawyer or studying to do them. I kind of though I agree with DJ. It was almost like they needed to give Sansa that line, so they just threw it at him to set him up.
Which was a great line. Sansa did have a good one.
Yeah,
so.
like
she has a couple.
Didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty good.
And then the only other thing I think on this particular scene in the Great Hall, which I know I've talked to both of you many times about, I think that the inheriting the sins of your father is a huge theme through this entire series. One of many themes, but
you've said this for years now,
for a long time now. Yeah. And Jon almost word for word spoke to that. And this is actually, you asked us to. I'll just jump into this early to pick our favorite quotes, and this will be my favorite quote for the episode.
I forgot to do that.
Where Jon says, "It's fine. You'll think of something on the way." Where Jon says, "I will not punish a son for his father's sins." I mean, almost word for word. Exactly how I've talked about that theme, and so that was really big for me to hear that in this episode, and I thought it was a great.
Yeah, as soon as they said it, I was like, that's DJ right there. I absolutely brought you into my head when I was watching it first moment. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. You're always there somewhere.
That's okay. We're getting a little creepy, but
starting to feel a bit like a third wheel here, guys.
It's just a bromance. Don't worry about it.
So, if no one has anything else to say on the Great Hall scene, we can move to the balcony scene in which Jon and
Sansa. You were talking about irony, and what she basically laid forth there in the Great Hall scene is what Joffrey did when he killed Ned. He was supposed to be rewarded and sent to the wall, correct? Yeah. And then Joffrey decided to flip it and say, well, no, if you break the law, you're going to get punished. That's exactly what Sansa's doing, rather than, well, maybe we'll give them a chance because it wasn't their fault. She's saying, well, no, we have to punish them. It's the exact same thing that Joffrey did.
Yeah.
It's very ironic, in my opinion. Or am I being Alanis Morissette there and totally getting irony wrong?
No, it's that is the correct usage of irony.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I would say it almost seems like, despite how much this is her experience, and she actually talks about this, and we're getting to this scene for you, Calum. I know you want to move on to this one, which is good, where she talks about how she almost admires Cersei in a way. It's almost like the people who treated her the worst are the people she is taking cues from at this point, right? She's learning from those people. She learned that from Joffrey, as you say, and she learned how to be just a kind of a little bit ruthless from Cersei, and how to be politically ruthless from Littlefinger and such. So
okay, that kind of leads nicely into my
Sorry,
point.
guys, I just have a garbage truck or something moving around outside.
That's fine. We can't hear it. Just your sort of mention of Littlefinger leads quite nicely into my point, which is that the divide between Jon and Sansa is deepening quite severely. So evidence to this is sort of showed by the major disagreements that they've been having recently. The first of which being their conflict with regards to the war tactics prior to the Battle of the Bastards, and now more recently in this episode we've had a public display of differing ideals, which obviously, as we've mentioned, is how the Karstarks and Umbers should have been treated following their family's treason. And I think this is playing directly into Littlefinger's perceived plan, because obviously he wants Sansa to have power for his own personal gain. But the reason I say perceived is because I think that we don't truly know or understand the extent of Littlefinger's plan, because in recent episodes he's seemingly been sort of dragged down and outwitted by Sansa on two separate occasions. Firstly, the remark about his picture being pretty, sort of shutting him down in that scene, and then again similarly in this episode, Sansa saying no need to seize the final word. I'll assume it was clever. I think this is sort of trying to get the audience to believe that Sansa's getting a step up on Littlefinger. However, one thing I would say is that we should definitely not overlook or underestimate Littlefinger, especially due to the fact that his sort of chaotic ladder philosophy is going to have more potential than ever in the coming episodes, because obviously of the threat that's looming from the north. So that's one thing I wanted to say, because I feel as though a lot of people are counting Littlefinger out because Sansa seems to be getting ahead of him. But I wonder whether or not the picture that he's painted to Sansa regarding what he is striving for is actually an accurate representation of his goals. Because chaos is a ladder, and there's going to be nothing but chaos in the coming months.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just want to point out too, like she tells Jon all about Cersei and not to turn his back on Cersei, but perhaps she is doing this with Littlefinger. She thinks she has the upper hand on him, and he's been playing the game a hell of a lot longer than she is.
Exactly.
Yeah, just because she knows that he's up to something doesn't mean she knows what he's up to.
Yeah.
And if I could piggyback on that, I have on kind of both of those points. I think that even if Littlefinger is killed or whatever in the season, he's clearly gotten in Sansa's head. She now, in a way, thinks like Littlefinger. So despite the fact that she's trying to push him away, I think he's already almost infected her mind with his worldview, so to speak. And then going to Cersei, right? If chaos is a ladder, Cersei is right now his best friend in a way,
Sure.
Because I think that when we're talking about Cersei, her situation looks like she cannot win to us, and I think the show writers may be saying to us in this scene that not only is Jon underestimating Cersei, but we as viewers may be. And even if Cersei can't walk away with the throne at the end of this series, she can certainly fuck up everything for these people who can cause chaos, just like we saw with the Sept of Baelor, right? She caused chaos by blowing the whole thing wide open. And I think in a sense, that's ultimately the only thing she can do at this point is just cause chaos. So, it's perfect for him.
Yeah, I agree.
That's all I have on that particular balcony scene. So you guys can take the reins.
One quick thing I just want to add is I made a note that I think that, and we talked about this briefly, I think Jon and Sansa, if they could come together, would almost be the perfect ruler, right? Because I think Jon needs some of Sansa's cold logic, and I think Sansa needs some of Jon's compassion and that side of the empathy thing there. And if they met in the middle, it would just be, a perfect combination of those two sides.
Yeah, I think I actually said this in response to you the first time you told me this, but I think that's sort of another theme. I mean, you could argue that anything's a theme, but I think that this is genuinely a theme within Game of Thrones of sort of the inability of siblings to fuse together their powers. So I think the main example of this, and quite obvious, I think many people will be thinking about exactly what I'm going to say, is the Lannisters. So you're saying that if Jon and Sansa met in the middle, Jon would have sort of the political prowess and the strength to be leader, whereas he's lacking some of Sansa's the harshness necessary to rule in a world like Westeros. And if they met in the middle, they'd be sort of a really strong force. Whereas similarly, you have Tyrion, Cersei, and Jaime, who all three make up probably the perfect unit with regards to ruling a nation. However, they also were unable to come together and fuse their intellectual power to make one unit. However, I think that potentially the North may prove to be better in that respect, and they may in fact come together.
I agree. Did I mention all that in Small Council, Calum?
I didn't. I watched Small Council for around 15 minutes.
All right.
I tried not to watch as much as I could.
If I did, I apologize, because at some point in my mind, I think that I mentioned something about sibling rivalry, and if I had taken that from you, I completely apologize. But yeah, no, it's absolutely a great point. There's sibling rivalry going on throughout the whole freaking spectrum of the show.
Yeah.
Whenever it's even Jojen and Mira, right? They're always at each other's throats, and it's just, yeah.
Can we talk real quick about a place where the siblings did come together really effectively? Would be Doran and Oberyn Martell. I think where Doran was almost the mind and Oberyn was the arm.
In the books, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. We don't need to talk about Doran in the show.
The funny thing is that it's funny you should mention that, actually, because my favorite quote throughout all of the books is actually in direct reference to that. Can I read this, my favorite quote? It's completely unrelated to this episode, but
sure.
I feel like I want to share this quote because it's just absolute genius. It's genius novel writing from George. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. So my favorite quote throughout all of the books, and this is quite a big thing, is where Doran says, "I am not blind nor deaf. I know that you all believe me weak, frightened, feeble. Your father knew me better. Oberyn was ever the viper, deadly, dangerous, unpredictable. No man dared tread on him. I was the grass, pleasant, complacent, sweet-smelling, swaying with every breeze. Who fears to walk upon the grass? But it is the grass that hides the viper from his enemies and shelters him until he strikes." I just can't get over how good that is. I really can't get over how good that is.
That is very good. There's also a quote, though, in the books that contradicts that. Contradicts that. And I don't know if it's with Dorne, but it's a passage about the first viper to stick its head out of the grass is the one that gets its head chopped off.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sure there are contradictions to that quote, but I mean, I'm just talking about isolation.
It was.
Well, I don't think that's a contradiction, because what Doran was saying is that when that was the situation, when the viper was hiding in the grass, that was the most effective they were.
Yes.
But as soon as the viper left the grass, that's when everything fell to shit, I guess, in a way.
When he stuck his head up. Yeah.
Exactly. But
maybe that was that before or after Oberyn was killed?
Did he said that after he was killed?
Because if that was before, it would have been one of the greatest pieces of foreshadowing that the books have produced. But unfortunately,
you mean MP's quote? I don't know when that.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. I just remember it because I've used it as reference to a personal opinion of mine.
I honestly have no reason why I've just read that quote, because it's completely unrelated, but I just had to.
Doesn't matter.
It's just that good.
It's an
That's
awesome
what we're here for, man.
It's because I mentioned Dorne, which just real quickly, I think a lot of people don't like Dorne the way it was done in the show, and Dorne is my favorite region in the books. So it just hurts. It's painful to think of how the show did that. But
before we get into a spat, let's just move quickly on.
Yeah.
If anyone has anything else to say on the balcony scene, otherwise we'll move to King's Landing.
Yeah, I have nothing special. Just sort of the juxtaposition between, I said this in Small Council too, but Sansa and Littlefinger, they're looking in opposite directions from each other, and then when Sansa goes to talk to Jon, they make a point of showing her grab Jon, spin around, and look at her. And like you guys were saying before, I think that relationship is probably, despite being tumultuous, one of the most healthiest. Like, you need that sort of other person. Each together, they make a great team. Yeah. And as long as they can trust each other, they'll be okay, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yep, we'll see.
Hopefully.
Okay, moving
That's
on.
a great point, though, yeah. So I don't have much on King's Landing, so if somebody wants to start, I'll rip off that. I know you have a lot,
Yeah.
Calum.
Calum, you said you had some.
Oh, Calum, I think you're muted, bud.
Sorry. Yeah, I do have something to say. I think that the first, I'll go into this in more detail, but I think the first aspect of what I'll say has been noticed by a few people. I'm not sure the extent of which, because I haven't actually, watched a lot of reviews or anything, because I wanted to have my own opinions,
Perfect,
as opposed to like listen to others. But so I'm gonna go into it. So this is in reference to the scene in which Cersei is standing on the map and talking to Jaime. So the first thing I'd like to say on this is that Cersei, now that her children are all dead, Cersei has no reason to preserve the realm, because she has no kids to take over. There's nothing to hand over to anyone, or there's no reason to keep anything, because there's no one to hand it over to. And so the only way that the Lannister family lives on is through legacy and reputation. And so I feel as though that's sort of implying, and to that effect, it would make sense that, to what DJ said earlier, which is that destroying Westeros, or at least causing as much damage as possible, is going to be the way that Cersei's character arc goes. That's a side point. The main point I wanted to talk about with regards to this scene is Cersei's positioning on the map compared with Jaime's, and I think a few people have noticed that Cersei was actually stood on the neck of of Westeros, and I think some people are arguing that sort of implies that she's going to try and strangle the realm. But one thing that I noticed, and I'm not sure if other people have as well, and if they have, then that's fine, I suppose. But I thought it was extremely interesting was that while Cersei is stood on the neck, Jaime is actually stood at the fingers of Westeros. Okay, beautiful. And so and while they are stood in these positions, Cersei talks to Jaime about the fact that he allowed Tyrion to escape. And I think the quote was something along the lines of, "Our brother who murdered our firstborn son and murdered our father, you allowed him to escape," sort of thing. And what I think this means is that it goes back to the Valonqar prophecy, and I think this is foreshadowing that Jaime will in fact be the person who strangles Cersei, and I think that the reason he'll do that will be not because she's going to blow up King's Landing or anything similar, but rather because she's going to fatally harm Tyrion. And I feel as though that the juxtaposition of Cersei and Jaime standing in their respective positions of the neck and the fingers, while simultaneously talking about Tyrion, I think is a foreshadow for the fact that Jaime will be forced to kill Cersei because of the fact that she is threatening Tyrion. But what if that comes to fruition is a mystery. But hopefully it will.
No, I thought that was pretty cool. That was great. I didn't notice that. I didn't notice that at all about the fingers. Yeah, I saw the neck thing, but I'd also heard it before too, like you said. Yeah, I think that's one thing though, and this has nothing to do with it, but you mentioned about Cersei blowing up King's Landing. I feel like the wildfire's now been done. I don't think there's any more left. DJ, you think there's still?
Oh yeah, you know I disagree with you.
No,
I mean,
I thought that you called it with the tower and everything like that.
I did.
Yeah.
I had, for those of you who don't know, I had a video a while back, a couple of years ago, about how much wildfire might be left, but I definitely still think there's more. I mean, when they talk about it in the books, the pyromancers, they have no idea how much wildfire there is and where it's left. They sometimes will be wandering under King's Landing and they will open a door and suddenly there's a brand new room just filled with old wildfire. I still think there's more personally.
Yeah, I suppose you're right, because Ares, his intention was to blow up the whole city.
The whole city.
Yeah, I mean, she only used the wildfire that was stashed below the sept, right? Whereas
I thought she moved it there.
She might have moved some, yeah. It's true. But I mean, you still got to think, if there was that much wildfire there, that's still, I mean, that was a big explosion, but that wasn't enough to, I think, level an entire city.
No.
I still think there's more out there, and I think we may actually see King's Landing go under by the end of this.
Yeah, I was always under the assumption that it would be the dragons that sort of caused the chaos
Set
there.
it off. Sure.
But, oh yeah, if the dragons come and start laying waste, well then boom, and it's done, right? Holy shit, good point. Cool.
The one thing, so if we are, unless anyone wants, I wanted to make one more note of the map thing.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
So I didn't catch that. That was an awesome observation, Calum, about the neck and the fingers and all that. But one thing I did notice was, and this is just a small thing, it's not nothing deep, but the part of the map that the guy is working on seems to be up towards the north, right? If I remember correctly. This is something I just wrote down. I just kind of thought of, but it's like Cersei's been so focused going south, and maybe even in the stories too, right? So much of it is focused on the politics of Westeros, but we're starting to go further and further north, where maybe the real threat lays.
Yeah.
Very good. I love it. Yeah, as far as the map thing goes, I think you guys have covered it pretty much superbly with both those statements. I mean, I can't really add much to it. Yeah, I told you guys about the wine thing already, so I won't bring that up again.
I feel as though it's worth bringing up again if you.
I suppose I did mention it in small council. I always assume that most people that watch this need me on small council. But yes, the reason Cersei, we always see her drinking wine, is it represents her thirst for power. And it just came to me, and I'm fairly certain that's the actual point of her in that wine glass, is just her thirst, and she's always wanting more. And it seems to be like every time she reaches for it is when somebody challenges her, and then she's grabbing a drink.
It's such a great observation. I love the symbolism behind that. I would even add further that much like the power she's seeking, it's really only damaging her.
Sure. Yeah.
And those around her.
I like that as well.
Absolutely.
Just so you guys know, that's all I have for King's Landing, including the Euron scene, because I thought the Euron scene. I know I'm going to say, like, you guys can take over from now, but I just thought the Euron scene was a bit too gimmicky for my liking personally. But
so if I can talk quickly about the Euron scene,
go for it. Lay waste.
The first note I have upon arrival of the Greyjoys is why? I hate everything about this, the way the show has portrayed Euron, who's such a great, awesome character in the books, but is just so, there's no depth to him at all in the show, and I just can't stand his character in the show.
It seems almost comical as opposed to intimidating.
Exactly.
It's just
he's a jock. That's what my roommate called him, a jock. He said he's the jock of Westeros.
Sure. There you go.
There's nothing. It's vapid. There's just nothing interesting there. Also, just how quickly they built those damn ships. And I know I'm not going to be the only one who mentions that, but it's just crazy to think that we left at the end of last season where he's like, okay, let's try to find some trees to build a ship. And the next thing you know, you have this crazy armada of ships.
Yeah, 1,000 ships, I think he called it.
It's nuts. And yeah, I just wrote, Euron is a shitty character. That's pretty much...
That's the extent of your analysis.
That's pretty much it. I mean, we could talk about what gift is Euron bringing. I personally think it's Tyrion. I think probably all three of us.
I agree.
I don't think it's Tyrion.
Oh, interesting.
I think it'll be the Sand Snakes, because I feel as though it's quite an efficient way to get rid of characters that people didn't really appreciate, and also ties up old plot lines. I think it will be either, if not all, definitely one of the Sand Snakes.
That's
actually true.
That's a very good point.
Didn't even consider that.
The only reason I think that it's Tyrion, and I agree with DJ, is because I'm fairly certain, I might be making this up, but the previously on Game of Thrones, they show when Tyrion, I think they showed, was presented to Dany, and then they said, and that's when he says, "I'm the gift."
Yeah, she says, "Who are you?" or whatever, and he says, "I'm the gift."
And he says, "I'm the gift." So that's the only reason why I think it's. The intention is for it to be Tyrion. Whether or not he's successful, I don't know, because I know the description for this episode is, or episode 3, is that Cersei returns a gift. So I don't know if that means that she gives Euron a gift in exchange for his gift, or if she sends the gift that he gives her back. And if it's Tyrion, we know she's not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I don't personally think it will be Tyrion.
Sand Snakes is a great point. That makes a great argument.
But I think that if they do want to make Euron into the ultimate villain of this series, then him handing over the fan favorite character would be a way of doing that. Although I personally do not think it will be Tyrion, but it would be interesting if it was.
Sure. As for Euron, I have a few more things. One is, you notice that his ship, which is the only cool thing about him, was that ship. I quite like.
His ship was badass.
His ship
has
was pretty
wings,
cool.
right? So it represents basically a dragon, a sea dragon. But thinking about it, is the two things that you can circumnavigate the globe with in this world are dragons and ships. Right, that's the only way you can travel to far off places in this world, which I thought is an interesting parallel between the two things.
Well, Varys might disagree, seeing as how he seems to be able to teleport anywhere he wants.
Varys teleports. We have the Star Trek machine where they hydrate ships.
Yeah, exactly.
So definitely getting sci-fi now for sure.
Unless of course you're Bran, in which case you can travel not only through space but also through time.
Yep.
Yes. Even he teleports himself a few times too. Yeah. Anyways, that was just a note there. And the other thing is, and I know I mentioned this to you, and I didn't bring it up in small council because I decided against it, but I noticed somebody in the comments had mentioned it. And have you seen the trailer for the next episode, you guys?
Nope.
No.
Okay, so there is like a 20-second clip for the next episode. But Euron, when he's talking to Cersei, he does the whole Night's King pose, like basically exactly the way the Night's King did it. And I decided to let it go because I couldn't find a tie-in. But then thinking about the Night's King and what I sort of think that it wasn't a resurrection thing for him. To me, the Night's King is looking at Jon saying, you can have all of this. This could be yours. That's what this position means. Yeah. And basically when Euron's talking to Cersei, he's saying, I can give you everything that he can't, he being Jaime. And he does that same thing. And then in the clip for next season, next episode, he's riding through King's Landing on a horse, and he's doing the same thing again. Like the exact same pose again. I probably wouldn't have brought it up if I didn't see him doing it a second time. So, and it's more like just embrace me, sort of, because it's the people, like the peasants and everything like that are around him. I think small folk. Thank you. Peasants is such a mean word. You peasant. Anyways, that's all I have on that. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's actually a connection or if I'm just drawing insane parallels because it's something that looks similar to something. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
There's one thing I did forget about as far. Oh, Calum, you're muted.
If I was just going to talk about one other potential connection, but if you want to go, then feel free.
Go ahead. You go first, because mine's a little.
If we're talking about connections between, are you talking about Euron in particular, or the Greyjoys?
Me?
Yeah.
Euron. Just
one thing that I thought. I haven't actually thought this out thoroughly. It just sort of popped into my head about 20 seconds ago when you were saying that. But one other thing that would potentially connect the Greyjoys as a whole to the Whites would be their words, which is obviously what is dead may never die, in the sense that like the Whites seem almost unable to die. Obviously they can die, but that's potentially another connection. But
no,
maybe
absolutely. I mean, I've definitely had those thoughts before because they're right there in front of you. What is dead may never die. So you kind of have to make that connection. Another weird thing though is, and I think we talked about this before, is that the Ironborn are essentially wildlings that are allowed to be south of the wall. Like they do the exact same stuff. Is they raid Westeros and then go back to their home and live off the spoils, and that's what arguably the wall's supposed to stop.
They even take the women. Yeah, they even
stop the wildling. Yeah, they take the women. They have their salt wives. So it's sort of like, why are they allowed? And I mean, I know they had the rebellion and it kind of got quashed, but still, that's what they do. That's what their words are, and they're still there. So what makes them so special? And same as Jamie, when we did, or Jamie, DJ, when we did talk about this, you mentioned
we look very similar, so I can understand.
We mentioned the hill tribes, and they're kind of the same as well, right? Like they're essentially a version of the wildlings that don't follow the rule of anybody else, yet they're allowed to.
They live south of the wall. Yeah. If I could, real quick before we go on, because somebody in the comments will probably do it to you, so I might as well do it here.
You scared me for a second. I was like, "What? There's people in the comments?" I didn't think.
No, not yet, but there's an actually moment I have to add to this, which is the Greyjoy words are actually "we do not sow." But it's similar to a Lannister always pays his debts. It's not their words, but it's a common saying there. So I just I have to be an asshole and make sure I note that.
No. Good point. It's the same thing as the Lannisters with the Lannister out.
Doesn't detract from your points though. That is a great point. And the other thing I actually forgot about.
I do love getting into semantics.
Yeah.
It's a great deal of fun.
Well, that's the best part of these books, man. It's all about the semantics.
Always a good time. The only other note on this scene that I have is, I guess maybe Euron saying regarding killing your brother, you should try it sometime, and that look Jamie gives Cersei when he says that, I thought was a kind of cool little nod to some of the theories people have about how the Tyrion, Jamie, and Cersei triangle works. So
an off-topic but on-topic sort of question here. Any ideas as to why we're not getting any of the one-eyed characters in this series?
Yeah, that's weird, right? I don't know.
Like when we had the first Blood Raven, like at the end of season whatever, did he have the missing eye? Like the dude with
not that I remember. I think he was just super old. I think that was the only.
I thought he was a better Blood Raven than the guy that ended up playing him myself.
I don't know why they got rid of him. Did he maybe die or something? I don't know.
But yeah,
you go to is that he died.
Well, he was pretty old. That's all I'm saying.
I wonder why they're denying us. Like, I mean, how hard is it to just put an eye patch on somebody or something like that? I mean, it feels to me like they're doing it intentionally, but I don't know what the reason is.
Yeah, I don't know. Especially, I mean, and obviously they haven't mentioned Euron's nickname, so I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah. There's quite a few seemingly pointless changes from the books. I mean, you've got the whole salt throne thing, and I don't know. They do seem to make pointless changes, but I guess that's just what we have to live with.
Yep. Very true.
Anyone got anything else, or should we move on to the Citadel?
Citadel is up.
I think the Citadel stuff is maybe where I have some of my more extensive notes and stuff. So
Excellent.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, you guys talk it out. I actually just have to run to the washroom for a second here. I'll be right back.
you got it. I guess we'll start with the device that has been in the intro to Game of Thrones since the very beginning, which people have noted obviously is within the Citadel. And I was looking at this trying to figure out, like, is there something important about this? And I've come up with some crackpot stuff, but there's really nothing I could think of around these hanging devices. I've made a couple notes. At first, I thought it looks like some kind of. I feel like in the last video we did with MP, I also brought up some orbital mechanics stuff, but it almost looks like these mirrors are orbiting the center of the thing. But as I looked at it more, I realized that what's happening is these mirrors are positioned in a way where the sunlight comes through and the mirrors point the light somewhere. So it's actually more like a natural light source, maybe for the library, so they can direct light towards books or maybe reading areas so that there's light there without candles, and so you don't burn the books. That's one thing I came up with.
One. I mean, I'm going to ask this when MP gets back as well. But I thought that we might as well get the discussion going. Which is that we've discussed this somewhat minimally in private. Which is the question I have regarding this whole this Citadel. I also have an answer. However, I don't feel as though my answer is fully fleshed out. Which is why obviously I want to present this question. So the question is that why do you think that the intelligent members of the Citadel would allow someone with a disease which can spread like wildfire within the walls of their hub? It seems like a lot of risk for very minimal gain on their part. My answer to this, my answer to my own question, was that perhaps they are experimenting on him to sort of progress or further their understanding of the disease. But even so, it does seem as though it's the risk of that disease spreading within the Citadel is so huge that it does seem kind of I don't know, it seems kind of ignorant of the Maesters to allow him in there. But I wanted to ask you what you guys think with regards to that.
I would say this, and this is in real history it was like this as well. There's no germ theory of disease yet in Westeros. They don't understand maybe that diseases can transmit via bacteria in the air or through liquid and things like that. But they might think that the only way to contract it is through contact, and if that's the case, then really you can set up a quarantine and never directly touch this person and possibly escape the contracting the disease. So
yeah.
Except when he reaches out at you like he does Sam.
yeah.
Did you have anything to say on that, MP? Do you sort of agree with DJ?
Well, I think he obviously went there himself, right, looking for the cure and trying to seek out help from them. You guys didn't watch Small Council, but do you know about the page of the book that Sam was reading?
Oh, you mean the Dragonstone cures Dragonstone seemingly cures grayscale?
Yeah, there's
Dragonglass, sorry.
Oh, what?
I don't know if it said grayscale directly, but it talked about the healing properties of grayscale. But it's touchy because it looks like they might be thinking that it's crackpot because people used to grind it up and drink it, and arguably it caused more problems than it helped, sort of thing. But so that's kind of my add-on there. I don't really know why. I mean, I totally get your point, but yeah, like DJ said, if it's just transmittable by touching and they know that as a fact, then yeah, you just keep them penned up and do what you can.
Yeah.
By the way, just because MP missed this, I want to mention this to him because maybe he can help me figure out something about this. The device shown in the intro to the series that we see in the Citadel, I don't know if there's more importance to this, but I think I've at least figured out why the Citadel uses it, which is that it's basically, you've got the center device and then you've got mirrors attached to it.
Yeah.
And I think what it's doing is it's harnessing sunlight. Sunlight comes down and the mirrors deflect them or reflect them down into reading areas possibly, so that you don't need candles in a library, because what's more dangerous than candles in a library, really?
Very cool.
But the one thing I was wondering is, because it's weird that they would include this in the intro to the series since day one, since we started. Is there something more important about it, like the idea behind harnessing that sunlight or harnessing that energy? Is the Citadel working on some kind of device that can do such a thing, and something along those ideas?
Yeah, so I can't be of any help. I think that's a brilliant thought, but I mean, I'd have to spend a little bit more time thinking about that, because it's just the first time I've ever heard it.
Exactly,
I mean, I know somebody did a great video, and I think I talked to you both about it, where they talk about the intro and what the intro shows, and you actually see the lenses clicking, like that guy.
That's right, yeah.
Reading the book, and their theory was that Sam's reading the book of The Song of Ice and Fire, and in the end it's something like that's how it's going to end, is Sam was reading the book or chronicling it. I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think personally they just chronicle events as it happens, and that's what that book's for, that the guy was writing it, and they just receive ravens from everybody that tell them of events around the realm. And the reason that Sam snuck up on him is because Aemon died and nobody sent the raven, right? And so they didn't know that Aemon was dead and everything that was going on. That's my opinion there. I just had
to throw something interesting out there too. I wonder if these devices have anything to do with using them to harness the ability to use glass candles, right? So in other words, if you use a glass candle instead of sunlight, if that's what somehow allows you to peer into different parts of the world, as we seem to see with glass candles in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's almost like glass candles, though. You can teleport yourself too, right?
Like, I don't know. We're not really too sure. So a lot of the glass candle stuff, I think, relies on dreams or dream states, where you, like, if you're talking about where Dany sees Quaithe, it's like every time she does, she seems to be in sort of a dreamlike kind of state, from what I remember.
Very true. Very true. Yeah.
So, but just an interesting thought. I think throwing that out in the internet is always a good idea. Maybe some people will come up with some really cool things with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very, very true. Very true. And I hope that you do, because I thought that was a great point. I mean, I saw the mirrors, and I was like, I don't know what they were. I always thought it was some sort of planet type system.
That's what I thought originally too. By the way, in the last video we did, I brought up some of the orbital mechanics stuff, and I actually have some more stuff to bring up. If you want, I can hit it now, unless somebody wants to
go for it.
Add something else, which is another screenshot of the book we saw in the restricted section of the Citadel. And this has been bugging me. Unlike the other books, I've managed to capture some screenshots of books which we can actually read the words on, and we'll get to that later. But for this one, I have been trying to look at this and figure out what the hell it is doing. Well, what is it showing us, if anything? Now, it could just be something they put in for fun, right? But this image, it just seems so specific. I don't know why they would have included this. They didn't need to show this book at all. So I don't know. There might be nothing here, but I was trying to figure out if this is some kind of we go back to the people who theorized about the binary star systems and all kinds of crazy things. And I don't think George is quite that scientifically literate to do that kind of thing, but it almost looks like some kind of orbit, right? But what's weird about it is, if it's an orbit, what is it orbiting? Because this middle piece isn't a sun, or at least does not appear to be. This thing on the right might be a sun of some sort, casting light. But I don't see a pattern in.
Well, I think looking at it, I would assume that those what you're saying orbit are actually the centerpiece themselves, the different stages of that centerpiece. And I know Eric Elgrinch, he's going to love the fact that you showed that. He'll be all over that, cool. I'm assuming, with something. So let us know what you think, Eric. But yeah, I think, go back to that. Can you share that again, DJ?
Is it not still there?
Yeah, you have to keep talking. Yeah, shit. That's right. Yeah. Don't worry. But it looks like there's sort of maps just putting that thing into a bigger perspective rather than the small one, so that they can show.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Catch. Yeah, I do. Yeah, sort of like when a US map shows Hawaii, they always have, I forget what they call it. It's like an inset or something like that, where they explode Hawaii up larger so you can see it. You know, that kind
But
of.
you're
thing.
right, though. There is also that circle going around it, so maybe that is an orb. I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely, I would call it some sort of planet
I
type.
don't think I'm going to be able to figure this one out. I'll keep looking at it, but I wanted to put it out there to see if other people can figure it out. Because if somebody can figure this out, I will be just as glad to watch somebody else, tell me what it is.
Sure. That's what I love about the comments. Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. So if anybody has any ideas, please make a video or comment or
I didn't
something.
even see that image at all during the
This
show.
stuck out to me immediately. I don't know what it is. Something about this is just really strange. But
I must have been slacking, man. Usually I stop and pause and read all the things. I didn't do that once with this episode. It's all about books.
there's more stuff coming from me. So
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say on that particular page of the book. I do have another point about the other scene within the Citadel, though, if we want to move on to that.
Sure, I do still have more stuff on the Citadel, but we can jump around. We can lump the two Citadel scenes together. I don't mind.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
So this point is something that I've actually thought about quite a lot, because it's actually an area that I'm interested in outside of Game of Thrones, and I feel as though they're linked together. So this is relating to when the Grand Maester is speaking about how nothing has gone catastrophically wrong before, which therefore suggests that nothing will go catastrophically wrong in the future. And I think that this is sort of a classic fallacy which can be linked to the theory of a fine-tuned universe.
It's an anthropological fallacy, right?
Right. And I think that it can be best, the fine-tuned universe and how it links to this specific scene can be best explained by what is known as the puddle analogy, which essentially goes as follows. Imagine that a puddle woke up one day as sort of like a cognitive being and observed the world around it. The hole or the crack that the puddle finds itself in is seemingly perfectly crafted for the puddle to be in. So perfect, potentially, that nothing could go wrong for the puddle. But then, of course, as the sun rises and the puddle gets smaller and smaller, the puddle is taken by surprise because it assumed that nothing could go wrong. And there are many messages that this analogy sort of encompasses, right? But, the main one probably being arguments against creationism, right? But how it sort of relates to this scene is it really exemplifies the danger of assuming that everything will be okay and the price that one can pay for such a belief. And I think it's really interesting how a man in such a position of intellectual superiority as the Grand Maester is, it's interesting that he's the one to sort of display this profound ignorance.
Deep.
Yeah, well, I don't want to detract away from what you're saying because it is brilliant. But for us non-Brits, he was not saying poodle; he was saying puddle. I was actually genuinely confused at first until he said the hole in which it sits. So.
It starts. I was confused until he said, "And the sun comes up and it gets smaller." Yeah, puddle. Gotcha.
Yeah, I don't think that's how poodles work.
Wait, what did I say?
No, it's just your accent. It to us it sounds a little bit like you're saying poodle, the dog.
Yeah. Puddle.
Yep, poodle. Exactly.
Not poodle, puddle.
But again, I don't want that to detract because that's that argument.
No, that was very awesome.
For a long time.
A lot of things, and I can't think of any of them right now. I was drawn to thinking about. Do you guys know about the black swan theory or analogy?
I think it sounds kind of vaguely familiar.
It does sound familiar, but I can't.
How it goes is, and I don't think this is actually what you're getting at, but it's what threw it into my head, was black swan. I think it was Germans. I always assumed that all swans were white,
okay. Yep.
Right? Until finally they saw black swan, and it revolutionized their way of thinking that they didn't know everything already. Shit's different just because they believe something's true. A black swan comes in and changes their whole thinking about certain things, which also I think kind of is what the White Walkers will represent in the end. They're the black swan for the rest of the realm. They don't believe in the White Walkers anymore, they're about to, and it's going to change everybody's way of thinking once again.
If I could tie this into a real world thing, right? Because I think we can agree that the Maesters and especially the Archmaesters sort of represent the leading scientific thought in Westeros, right? I think it was Kepler, if I remember correctly in real life, who was convinced that circles were a sacred shape, in that all planets and all orbits were precisely circular and represented. He was a very deeply religious person, that they represented a shape that God chose for things to work in. But through his experiments and through all his observations, found that things were more elliptical than circular. And when he spent so much time trying to show that circles were sacred, and then when he discovered they essentially weren't, he changed his thoughts. He said, despite how badly I want circles to be sacred, they are not. Things work, orbits especially work in ellipses. And I think that going to what you always talk about, MP, the denial of truth in this series, when the Maesters see real evidence of things like White Walkers, hopefully it won't be too late, but they're going to have to change their minds. They're going to have to realize that what they've thought, just because it was okay in the past, does not mean it will be okay in the future. I think all of this is sort of tied into that same idea.
Sure. Another thing too is, I mean, I can't really expand on this, but that Maester, I'm going to call him Marwyn because that's sort of who I feel like Sam's supposed to be with, but I really don't think that he's Marwyn. Said that the wall has stood through it all, which is wrong from what we know, right? Like the wall was built after the first long night, but he said that it was standing during that long night, is what he implied, at least. So I'm wondering if that's something that he knows that we don't, or if he's mistaken, and that shows how fallible the Maesters are as well. I'm not sure.
I didn't actually pick up on that, so that's interesting.
No, that's a great point. If we want to talk real briefly on the long night, I have another interesting screenshot to share if anyone wants to see.
Absolutely. Lay it on us. How are you doing for time, bud?
Oh yeah, we're still good. We're still pretty good.
Excellent.
I wanted to show you a quick screenshot of the book Gilly picked up called The Legend of the Long Night. And this isn't really anything deep as far as theories go. But what I did notice, I was reading this, and I was reading Sam's book too, but I've been unable to find where this might be. I promise you, I'm looking, I have A World of Ice and Fire, The World of Ice and Fire directly in front of me. This is word for word the section on the long night in The World of Ice and Fire.
Oh, really?
Word for word. As the first men established their realm following the pact, I'm reading it right here. Little troubled them save their own feuds and wars, or so the histories tell us. Word for word, this page is the section on the long night on in The World of Ice and Fire. So excellent. Just something I caught that was really cool, and I was like,
an excellent catch.
I recognize the style of writing, and I'm like, this sounds like something I've read before. I'm gonna check the book, and there it was, sitting right there. I've been unable thus far to find a correlation between the book Sam was reading though. Because the books he was reading was all about Dragonglass, and I searched through this book for a while last night and could not find a section on Dragonglass. Dragonglass isn't even mentioned in the index, so I could find nothing on it, unfortunately. But interesting little catch there.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that.
That's all I have for the Citadel. So over to you guys if you've got anything else to say.
I've still got more.
Yeah,
go ahead, MP.
I'll jump in a little bit here. It's quick, but I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on it. When I was talking to Small Council, somebody brought up the fact of possibly the reason why we got James called it poop soup, but is perhaps pale mares running around through the Citadel.
Is what's running around through the Citadel?
Pale mare, the bloody flux.
Oh. Yeah, and when Sam goes and takes the keys, there's that maester lying on the bed coughing and stuff. Yeah, that's fascinating.
That is. It's very. It could be likely a likely thing. I took it a totally different way, but in context of the TV show and the series, that could be possible.
No, I think that's a great catch. In the Jorah scene, Sam goes by and picks up a bowl at another one, and when he picks it up, I think you can hear somebody coughing and other disgusting noises coming from in there too. And considering, not to always bring it back to real life, but dysentery was obviously almost just a part of life in our history.
I think it's important to bring this story into real life situations and stuff like that. So I wouldn't apologize for that. I think that's part of the best parts about the book.
Yeah, definitely.
I have to jump back. I forgot something in regards to the Lannister scene.
No problem. Go right ahead.
We were talking about Cersei there's no kin left for the realm to get passed down to. The song that Ed Sheeran was singing is Tyrion's song. It's the song about Tyrion and Tisha. So that's a callback to the fact that perhaps Tyrion has a child out there. And then we see them saying, there's nobody left. We have no children. Perhaps Tyrion still does. So the Lannister name can still go on. That's all I was saying. That's my only point about that. I just forgot to bring it up when we did.
For some reason, and I don't know for sure, so you could be right, but I thought it was a song for Shay. Am I totally wrong on that? Does anyone know for sure?
I personally
don't know.
Let me explain the reason I thought it was for Shay too, because the line is hands of gold are always cold, but a woman's hands are warm, or something along those lines, right?
Did you say it's a new one, a new song? So maybe it was Shay.
Yeah.
But I'll have to actually. It's hands of gold. Yeah.
Again, not to detract from the point, because I think it's an awesome point, but yeah, I did catch that too. I'm like, where do I know this song? And then I put it together.
Okay, DJ, go give us some more
Citadel. I just wanted to make a note that I think we get more of examples of how Sam is the bravest person in this story. Just as Ned says, and only time a man can be brave is when he's afraid. We know that Sam is always afraid. I know this is not a new thought. People have said this. Therefore, when he stands up and does what he needs to do, it's always brave because he's always afraid. And we see him enduring with the poop soup and everything, right? We see him enduring all this because he knows he needs to do what he needs to do. And I just want to point out how much more I really appreciate Sam every time we get more and more of his story. I think I appreciate it more and more.
Yeah, he's such a stellar character. And I was getting in arguments on Small Council, saying basically the same. Sam's going to be the last hero. He's the guy that's going to do it. He's the one who's.
I think he'll
just love those chapters of his in Feast for Crows, or no, not Feast, but Dance. I think Dance. I can't even remember anymore.
Even if he's not the last hero, he'll give the last hero the information that they need in order to actually be a hero. So
Sam, I think it's Sam, but yes, you're right. He'll definitely.
Either way, he's definitely involved.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying that regardless of whether or not he's actually the one who's classed as the hero, he is always going to be the last hero. Either
we as readers will always know he was the hero.
Sure. In those chapters, though, and I try to say this a few times, but it gives you, he's running to get Darien or whatever his name is, and his sword belt's almost falling off, so you know he's getting fitter. And then in the next chapter, he's doing, on the cinnamon one, he's doing the work of 4 men. So he's working like a dog, and his arrows are finally reaching their target. Like, he's a dude in transformation. I just think it's brilliant, and people don't give him near enough credit for what that dude's doing.
My mother says she hates Sam's story, and I told her I think you're going to be surprised at just how much you like it by the end, how much you realize how important it is. So yeah, there was that. I would point out, going back to irony, how ironic it was going back to what the Maester said about the overhype of, everyone thinks it's always the end. Is the irony that this is really, the irony being he's saying that, but in reality, this is potentially the end if people don't act soon. So that irony. And I don't think there's anything here, but I did make a note of Sam standing over that body. Reminded me of Arya a little bit, standing over the bodies in the House of Black and White.
I said that was my cameo in Thrones. The maester with the extended liver.
Oh yeah. He was
I had I drew some weird things. Like, it was all about, for me, the whole poop soup and the shit, and then the books, and then the shit, and then the books. I drew quite a few analogies or metaphors from that. Basically, it's the consumption of knowledge and the digestion of it, and then it's the expulsion of it, right? And I thought there was like a tongue-in-cheek joke about like satire, not truthful, but satire about how a lot of TV show watchers won't touch the books. Like, the books are shit, but we have the TV show, we'll just get it that way, which is so like satire. But and then Sam has to put up with all the shit in the world at that time just to get to what he really wants to do, which is Sam's love is just books, right? And he has to deal with all this shit to get to his goal, which is like a metaphor for life with all of us.
This just occurred to me, this amazing analogy here.
Okay.
When you say Sam is dealing with all the shit, how I see it is because he has to do what he has to do. He needs this information because the world needs this information in order to save itself, in a way, right?
Sure.
And, the comparison, the one word I can think of in the Venn diagram of poop and him doing what he needs to do is the word duty.
Brilliant.
And I apologize for anybody who had to
endure. No, that's great. That's great. That's perfect. Do your duty, Sam.
Yeah, I thought that was good.
No, I think it's perfect.
If we just want to wrap the Citadel up, I guess, because there was the other scene later, just as in a comedic sense, I made a note of, and everybody's talked about how, Gilly was pregnant for like 2 years, then she had a newborn for 3 years, and now her kid exploded into a toddler.
Yeah, I noticed that too, for sure.
I just think that's funny.
One other thing that I had, which is just going again from sort of like what you said about the John saying the sins of the father thing. We were talking the other day, and I was speaking to Calum, and I was talking about how people interpret the information given to him. The maester basically said my thing, which is used Arya as an example of when King Robert died, and she hears all the rumors, but the one thing the rumor has in common is that King Robert is dead. So she knows that that's the actual truth. And then you brought up the ships and the dragons too, DJ, which is the exact same thing. The one thing they all have in common is that dragons.
Rumors. Yep.
Yeah.
The rumors change, but the one common theme is the dragons. Yep.
Yeah, and the maester said that there's too many similarities from unconnected sources. And then Sam says sources in the restricted area. Again, this is the tongue-in-cheek book reference. Like, oh, you mean in the books that we never read? There's information in there. So yeah, it was. I liked hearing that. But yeah, that's it. That's all I have.
Cool. And then Calum, if you want to jump in at any point, but I had one very last note, and it's not very important. But
go right ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to, the scene where they show the high tower with the burning fire atop the high tower?
Yep.
Just how, and because this is a fantasy novel and we know George R. Martin loves, some of the old fantasy, the high tower reminded me of either like Isengard, which is or and forgive me, some of the fantasy commenters I'm sure will know the name of the tower from Mordor with Sauron's eye above it.
Yeah, definitely looked like Sauron's tower.
Yeah, just a quick little thing reminded me a little bit of that. And that's it for me as far as Citadel goes, I think. Yeah.
Oh, I'm good. Moving on.
I don't want to spoil unless you guys have some fleshed out points. I don't want to spend too much time on the Ed Sheeran scene because it really just did not sit well with me at all. And the funny thing was, I was reading up on case law while the Small Council was on, and so I didn't manage to watch it, but I did watch. I think it was 10 or 15 minutes of the show, and it just so happened that it was around the time when I can't remember what each individual Small Council member said, but I felt as though the overall consensus was that the Ed Sheeran scene was good, or at least like acceptable.
Yeah, I think so.
I completely disagree, and I'm happy to I have this out with anyone, and I'm happy to be proved wrong as well, because this is obviously just my opinion. But for me, it's quite quick as well. I won't spend too much time talking about why, but the main things for me were twofold. The first was that I felt as though it was an unnecessary addition to the show, which personally for me felt cringy and forced, and it broke my immersion for the show. But obviously that's a very subjective point. The second point is more sort of quantifiable in a sense, which is that the people and the soldiers in that scene were supposed to be very much unnamed, vastly unimportant soldiers fighting a war, or at least defending lands in a war that they have absolutely no interest in fighting in. But the main point is that they're supposed to be very unimportant and unnamed. And I feel as though putting someone that is so widely recognized as Ed Sheeran into that role is just in open contradiction with what the characters are supposed to represent. And I felt as though that's actually been evidenced in this particular show that we've done, because when you MP were talking about the scene earlier, you said Ed Sheeran, and that's giving a name to characters which I believe are intended to be unnamed and unimportant, and that's why I particularly dislike this scene.
Sure, I mean, it is what it is, right? But to me, did you know that he was going to be in there, or you didn't have a clue?
I knew that Ed Sheeran was in Game of Thrones, but I didn't know which scene he was going to be involved in.
Yeah, no, and I didn't that either, but I knew that he was a fan of the show and asked sort of to be on it, which to me, I don't mind that. I mean, so I knew that there was an Ed Sheeran scene, and all I did was say, oh, well, there's the Ed Sheeran scene, and then went back to watching it. It didn't bother me in the slightest. But I can see why people get taken out, especially people who didn't know that he was going to be on there, and then all of a sudden they're, oh, it's Ed Sheeran. But to me, it was just, I
barely know who Ed Sheeran is, but even I recognized him somehow. So, and I think that's a fair point. Do we know for a fact this was the only scene he's going to be in, though? Could he?
Well, we don't.
Please let it be the only scene he's in.
Well,
perhaps dead body next season or next.
Well, but what I'm even more than that, if he's still alive, and let's say they do travel for a bit together or something, maybe he won't be as unnamed as you think, Calum. In which case, would that make you feel a little better about it? If, let's say, he had a little more importance, it wasn't supposed to be that he's.
I don't necessarily mean unnamed to us as viewers. I'm more talking about their significance with regards to the overall situation in Westeros. Like the soldiers in an army, especially in Westeros, are very much just unimportant cannon fodder. And I feel as though putting someone who's so widely recognized, I don't know, it just really contradicted the role that it was supposed to play, in my opinion. But shit happens.
Yeah, well, that's fair, I think.
T-Baby made an excellent point in Small Council, saying that what we didn't see in this was nobody introduced themselves to Arya, so they never gave her their names. But it's just kind of ironic that you say that, Calum, that we know Ed Sheeran's name. It'd be funny if he's the only one dead next episode, just because everybody knows his name. I'm just being silly. But yeah, no, it was. I enjoyed that.
I think also, I don't think going back to this, Ed Sheeran obviously sang, but I don't think he had any speaking lines after that, right?
He did.
Just what did he one say? Where it says it's a new song, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, Gotcha.
He did say something. I can't recall exactly what it was.
MP's got it right.
I mean, it wasn't great acting by any means or whatever, so I didn't get that.
I don't even know if you could say it was acting in general. So.
Yeah, it was just if he said a word. But
He said a word.
But shit, what was I?
Maybe they want to book him for next year's Game of Thrones music tour. Maybe that's why they did it.
Yep.
I mean, they wanted a song to be sung. Yes, they could have gotten anybody to do it, but I mean, he's a fan. He wanted to be on this show, and they gave him a role that he was suited for. I mean, it is what it is. Like DJ says, I mean, I think that's probably actually the first time I've ever heard, or at least knowingly heard, Ed Sheeran sing before in my life. But yes, I knew who he was.
Yeah.
Like I've seen him on talk shows and blah 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 blah
Seen
blah.
pictures of him.
Yeah. Never
That's
heard.
the only reason I recognized him. Yeah, exactly.
But he's a great fucking singer. That was a good song. I enjoyed it.
Voice, yeah.
Yeah.
I've got some other stuff we can talk about in this scene, even though Calum was blinded with rage during his watching of it. So I noticed in this scene that Arya was even when she's sitting down, they're sort of just starting to talk. One of the first things Arya does is look at their weapons laid out against the rocks. So she's still thinking in the mode. It reminds me of in the Jason Bourne movies. He always knows where the exits are, that kind of thing. Just a quick note on that. She's clearly still in assassin mode. I don't know if I personally think that she won't kill him. I guess we'll find out soon enough tomorrow. But the important thing to note there is that even if she doesn't kill them, she's still always thinking in that mode, right? That's the mode her mind works in now, is always know your opponent's strengths, always know, your chances, that kind of thing. So,
it's interesting too that they do tell Arya that they're sort of the Riverlands patrol, right? Like that's the area that they're working on, and the Riverlands being where the Red Wedding happened. She still might have that gnawing on her at some point in time too. I mean, it's hard for me. I was talking again to Eric, and he's of the opinion that after the House of Black and White, Arya she's on her true path now. She's content with everything. She's had her awakening. And so she's not angry anymore or anything like that. She's completely calm, which is why I sort of brought up the fact that the guys that she killed at the Red Wedding, despite the fact that they killed her family, they also broke the law of the realm, which justifies her in some way outside of herself. But these guys, I don't know. So I'm very curious to see what happens.
Right. I think it will tell us a lot about her path going forward.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Speaking of that idea, and we'll touch on the divine justice stuff just a bit, because we know the Hound mentions it in the next scene. My mom always told me to be kind to strangers, and strangers will be kind to you. I know for a fact, there are tons of people who had to have noted that, where we know Arya is in a way a representation of the stranger, right? And in a way, the stranger is linked to the god of death, the god of many faces and all that. The idea of this divine justice, right? Well, the Hound says there is no divine justice. If we find out that Arya did kill these people, that definitely goes towards what he's saying, right? If she's a representation of the stranger. And if she doesn't, then
I like
maybe
that.
there's more to it.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I'm so super curious to see what happens. Oh, it's fucking tomorrow, by the way.
I know. Yeah, we're almost there.
We get it tomorrow. That's cool.
Yep. Will Arya run into Lady in the Riverlands? I mean, not Lady. I wrote that incorrectly. That's shame on me. Nymeria.
Okay. So I'm not gonna say that. There's a preview out there which you guys can go watch right afterwards. But there's a wolf in the trailer for the next episode. But we don't know if it's actually Nymeria or anything. We just know that it's a wolf.
Right.
There's lots of speculation about whether it is or whether it isn't.
And I think that Nymeria and Ghost are now the only two living direwolves, correct? So
yes,
it would be kind of weird if Nymeria never came back, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think this definitely wasn't Ghost. I can tell you that much. But James also noted that, I believe it was James, that they're the only 2 wolves left, and it's a male and a female. So there's any more.
And there is definitely some talk about when George was originally conceiving this book that Arya and Jon may end up together, quote unquote. Though it seems like maybe that's turning into Sansa and Jon.
Was it them to end up together or them being twins? They were twins, right?
I think they were, but I thought there was a little more to their relationship than that. Maybe I'm wrong, but
that still to me is quite apparent in the books as well. Like both of them, when they're not together, they think about each other, and she remembers him doing that to her hair, and he remembers doing it to her hair, and blah blah blah.
And they're the only 2 of the children that look like a Stark, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unravel there, maybe, or maybe nothing. I think one last comedic note for me was there's the line that guy said where he says something like sometimes I think about my dad all alone on that boat, right? He's talking about his dad being a fisherman or a sailor of some sort. And even on my first watch of this episode, the first thing that jumped into mind is, oh my God, how long has Gendry been on that boat where he has a kid this old now?
He's an old man now. This is screw teleportation. He's got
exactly.
Magic, rapid growing sort of thing happening.
Well, maybe him and his boat found a portal through time. I don't know. Well, I guess we'll find out someday, maybe. But yeah, that's all I have on Arya.
Funny, he's just got massive arms, right? Just from rowing for fucking
yeah, he's just constantly rowing. Exactly. Where do you even find the time to have a kid there? I don't know. But if does anyone else have anything else on the Arya scene?
Nope.
I don't. No.
There's one thing I wanted to, and it's just a real quick thing, jump back to on one of the Winterfell scenes, which is, did you notice? I'm sure you've noticed. Cersei, her Kingsguard now wears black. Right, they
I didn't
their previous army. So Cersei's Kingsguard now wears black armor, all black armor, which I mean is kind of obvious symbolism. You know what I mean? It's a dark. They're now a force of dark or something along those lines. And I noticed that Brienne is also wearing black armor, and I wonder if we're drawing more comparisons between Cersei and Sansa now. Where in a way Sansa's Kingsguard is in a way also wearing black armor.
I like that. That's a good comparison.
Yeah, just a quick thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, the parallels between, well, I think all 3, Sansa, Cersei, and Dany are very, I don't know, apparent. Maybe less Dany, but when I think about Dany, I don't know if I mentioned it to you guys or not, but I think that she has the same sort of arc that Cersei's been on. She has 3 children, and she's using them to gain her position of power, which is kind of what Cersei did of her own. Yet we don't really see it because they're dragons, but it's the exact same thing. So I'm under the idea that at least one of those dragons has to die, if not all 3, before Dany has her cathartic moment and realizes that everything she's doing is nothing that she ever really wanted to do, right? Like, this was never her dream. She wanted to just live her happy life and sail around on boats. That's when she was happiest. She had happy moments there. The house with the red door. This is all Viserys's shit that he put into her head. And once the dragons were born, they sort of took root and made her sort of see, and this is again talking
she woke the dragon.
Yeah, but
we can talk about the Daenerys scene if no one has anything on the Hound scene.
I mean, we can go to Daenerys and then the Hound if you want.
Yeah,
I do have a couple things on the Hound.
Sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead. I was just trying to latch the comparisons of all 3.
Do we want to jump to Dany now, or?
Yeah, it's fine with me if Calum's got something to go.
Yeah, I mean, I've got more on the Dany scene than I do on the Hound scene. So
why don't we do the Hound then? Unless you finish your thought, MP, on that stuff.
Yeah, that was essentially it. I just think that there's more parallels than we would see. Just because we know that Dany is good and good intention doesn't mean that she's not on a darker path than what we would assume that she's on. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, agreed.
In opposed to her living a true existence to herself.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. She is not living by what she wants, though, for sure.
Yeah.
Talk more about that.
But anyways, yeah, start off with the Hound, and I'll jump in.
Cool.
Might as well just continue on the chronological order. So if we want to discuss the Hound scene, and then we can end with the Dany scene.
Sure. Who wants to go first?
Not me.
I can just quickly read off what I have and then throw it over to you guys, because my point is quite minimalistic. Just because you DJ mentioned that you wanted us to conjure our favorite quote from the episode. Mine lies with this one, and I think you already know what it is.
I think.
But my favorite quote. The funny thing is, I say it's my favorite quote, and I don't actually have the quote, so I'm gonna have to.
I might be able to help you here.
I'm gonna have to guess, or at least try and remember what it was. And I think it was something along the lines of, "If there was divine justice, you'd be dead, and that girl would still be alive."
Yeah,
is that right?
Pretty close. Yeah, I mean, yeah, essentially, yep. That's the crux.
So that's my favorite quote from the episode, because I think it speaks to the fact that either in the Westerosi world, either a god exists and he is, either unjust or impotent, or a god doesn't exist. Which I think is also, it's also a parallel to our own world, but I don't think we need to get into that right now.
Problem of evil. Yep.
Yeah. But I think that as just to sort of to add on to that before I hand it over, I think that it's more likely that heaven and hell do exist, although they exist on the planet in which we live, as opposed to just in some other afterlife, in an afterlife. Because I think that if in our world, if you're born in Africa, then that's pretty much as close to hell as you're going to get.
Parts of Africa.
Yeah,
you should probably
of course.
clarify that.
Clarify a little bit.
I think our intelligent listeners can we can assume that they knew.
Yes. Foreign countries, absolutely.
Yeah, of course. But that's all I had to say really on that particular scene.
Yeah, the divine justice thing I think is not only a thread through the entire series, but definitely this episode. I think it came up a few times, like we talked about with Arya. And there was something we mentioned earlier, which I can't remember quite off the top of my head, that was also in that vein.
See, I think that it goes to show that there's more to the White Walkers and their knowledge of death that, people like the Hound feel guilty of. Like, obviously, this was the man and the daughter that he stole from back in the other season, right? If you guys remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're dead and he's feeling some sort of guilt there, whereas you have the White Walkers, and it feels to me like they know something more about death and they have a better understanding of it, so it's not a problem to them. There's no fear of death for them, and there's an acceptance there. But everybody else in the world that's alive is so scared of death because they don't know what that is, and that's kind of the same for all of us, right? I don't know what my train of thought was supposed to be there. It's just kind of like interesting. And we also, of course, had the epic nod to the Gravedigger, so we know that for sure the Hound is the Gravedigger in the books, but everybody's, of course.
Yeah, we were pretty sure of that anyway, but yeah.
Yeah. Now, I felt like I saw a coin purse there, and I always go back to the coin purse in the children, but I think it was an empty coin purse this time. I think the Hound looked at it, but I'm not certain. But also interesting too, going back to Jon and Sansa. And I know we talked about this before. I don't know if it was on a video or just privately, where I explained children being used as commodity, like as coin, sort of traded in and amongst other people.
Yeah,
like on, like you barter with somebody and you arrange houses together and everything. So children are essentially commodities. In this episode, Jon says dragon glass is now more important to us than gold, which I thought's interesting to show how little value gold really has and what actually matters in the world is the tools that you need to survive, rather than this mythical dollar that everybody strives for. Which, I mean, I would love to have lots of the mythical dollar, but
I think
what's funny?
once you've got the ability to survive, then it becomes it becomes what you need to thrive, and I think that's the key difference.
Sure.
I'll share with you one more screenshot because it kind of talks about what you just said. John said here, which is the book Sam was reading. I'll read it for you. Just this one part. True legend has it that Valyria took as much dragon glass as gold from the mines beneath their 14 flames. Just a real quick thing there. So mining of dragon glass apparently was as important to them as the mining of gold.
yeah,
So
interesting.
kind of just and that was before the Doom. So
Yeah.
what were they mining all that dragon glass for?
Yeah, no shit. Absolutely.
I think the dragon glass, maybe like you said now, and I totally missed this, might have maybe it is used for, it has some medicinal properties. Maybe it is used in the creation of Valyrian steel.
Oh, hey, there's an idea.
That's something I've been trying to think of recently, but I don't have much to go on yet with that. But I think dragon glass might potentially have something to do with the forging.
I love that. I love that. And Sam would be the one to figure that out, of course. And then Gendry comes back and starts wielding, because he knows how to work Valyrian steel, right?
His Valyrian ores.
So that's how he moves around so fast or so long. Yeah, they're lighter than regular ores. I can row for days. I can row for years.
Exactly. Yeah. If anyone else I got a couple more quick notes on the Hound scene.
Go for it.
First, I noticed that I think the Hound has quit the drink.
Oh.
Thoros offers him rum and he says, I hate that shit, too sweet. But you know what? Since we've seen him come back, I haven't seen him drink anything. I haven't seen him drink any alcohol. Just a quick thought.
That you remember or that you know?
That I remember, yeah. I haven't gone back and watched every episode with him yet, but
I love that quote, by the way.
Which one?
The one where the Hound says that rum is too sweet. I loved that. It was such a good addition to his character.
Right. Yeah, good line. And then the next quote I have from him, which I thought might be meaningful, is he says, if your God is so all powerful, why doesn't he just tell you what the fuck he wants? And I think that there is some reference here to Bran in a way, right? Because when we're talking about gods, I always think of Bran in this series now. And I think that we've seen Bran, right, try to tell people what the fuck he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not as easy, right? So when we're talking about God, right, let's not compare him to what a god is like, or the idea of God is like, at least in real life. When we talk about all powerful, I don't think Bran is literally, a god, but he's certainly the closest thing to a sort of god in this world. And even with his abilities, he's not capable, at least yet, to convey accurate, easy to understand messages through his medium. So maybe a little bit of a reference there to Bran.
I think that's brilliant. I think that ties in perfectly. It's a great job.
Cool. And that's all I have for the Hound.
Yeah, I don't think I have much, honestly. I mentioned to small council that I was there, but it's something that I said ages ago, and I brought up way back when, like, what if the reason the Hound is scared of fire is because he saw something in the flames when he was burned way back when. And to me, that's I take this as a win on that topic, because there's a reason. Like, I don't assume that Thoros is getting all the other band of merry brothers to look into the flames and see stuff. I think he singled out the Hound intentionally and knew that he'd be able to. So I look at that as sort of a win on prediction scale way back when.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Other than that, I mean, I don't.
Same with Varys, right? I mean, he saw something spoke.
He heard something, right? Yeah, and that was
I love that.
That was Blue Flame, which we get with Jaime and Brienne in Jaime's fever dream, or whatever. Not fever dream, but just dream.
Right. No, I love that. That's a great observation.
Yeah, and it's just like goes back to the Kiss by Fire sort of episode, right? When there's so much in that scene or in that episode with all the characters involved that it was just kind of brilliant. But yeah. Anyways, I digress.
Yeah, no, it was good.
Calum, you got anything on the Hound?
I have nothing else to.
He's ready for Danny.
All right,
ready for Danny.
Viewer.
In more ways than one.
Yeah, of course. Why don't you? I have very few notes on Danny. If you want me to make one.
Yep, go right ahead.
Very few, but the one I did catch, I know you guys, I'm sure you know of Preston Jacobs, probably caught a couple things, but one series, a quick series he does is on the genetics of dragons or something, which I don't fully agree with these theories, but I find them interesting. He does some really interesting videos. But one thing I noticed is Danny's hair, and this is just stupid and quick, but her hair is in a double helix. If you look,
I've always noticed that too.
I'm right strand. Yeah. So just something, and we know. I mean, there's a character for Christ's sake called Gene Poole. You know what I mean? So we know, and he's a sci-fi writer. George R. Martin's a sci-fi writer.
I don't know if I've ever caught on to that. I'm surprised that I haven't, but
yeah, it is a good one. So I mean, awesome. And we know genetics, even if it's not fleshed out in a scientific way in the series, is clearly important. The seed is strong, the Valyrian blood, keeping it pure, White Walkers even, producing offspring. So genetics in some sense is important to the series. And so I thought the double helix thing was pretty cool.
No, I definitely noticed that, DJ, and that's what came to my mind too, was DNA strands sort of thing. But I also thought, it's this weird intertwining, but I've always been trying to figure it out, but way to go. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that. It's cool. And then I just made a note, because I'm a child, dragons are awesome. That's all I have to say about the dragons. Do you think we'll get a place called Danny's Landing, Daenerys' Landing or something? Thought that was kind of an interesting little nod. I mean, like her landing on the ground, like when Aegon landed in King's Landing, he took stock of the land around him and had a vision for what it will hold for him and his family. So
it's worthwhile. I mean, it doesn't roll off the tongue as
not exactly,
Landing, but Queen's Landing, I suppose.
Queen's Landing, maybe. Yeah, exactly. And then the very last thing I just made a note of was that must have been the hardest walk in Tyrion's life, going through that wall. That was intense. I can't imagine being as small as him and making that walk. So, and that's all.
I know I told you guys already, but Tinker Jaso actually did that walk up to that thing. Like, she lives in Spain there, so she was able to go to the place.
That's awesome.
And I didn't ask her how long it actually took, but that looks like a tough fucking march, man. Yeah. He probably got carried.
Somebody put him in like a baby Bjorn or something.
Or hop on, like, why wouldn't you just hop on the fucking dragon? Let's get a lift up. Anyways, go ahead, Calum. You got probably the most. I don't have much.
See what you got.
And then she accidentally says Dracarys, and the dragon just tortures the entirety of Dragonstone, and she has nowhere to go, and then she dies. Anyway,
she forgot to conjugate the verb.
Yeah, I don't have too much, but I do have I'd say like two main points on this scene. The first one is that this is not unique to Game of Thrones, but I think one sort of aspect of cinematography that oftentimes goes amiss is when the showrunners or the producers or the writers make something overtly significant out of something that should be subtle. And one example I think that one example of this that I think happened in this scene is when Dany lands at the shores of Dragonstone, and she bends down and picks up the sand and whatnot. And I think many people have quite rightly pointed out that obviously signifies that, like, she believes that she's home and that's like her soil and whatever. But I feel as though it's got another meaning as well, which can also be linked to the fact that when she gets into the war room within Dragonstone, she once again runs her hand over the ground of Westeros, albeit this time in like a in a metaphorical sense over the map. But I think that this is really significant because I think it speaks to her mindset with regards to the fact that she believes now that she owns Westeros and that she is the rightful ruler. And I think it gives insight into the mental journey that she's gone through, namely the transition from yearning only for her own red door to now believing that she owns all of the red doors. And I think that's quite poetic in that sense.
Cool.
Really like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. She owns all the red doors.
What was you said you had two. Do you have another one?
My second one was somewhat of a meta point on the show, which was I feel as though that the final line of the dialogue, which is obviously "Shall we begin," is somewhat of a double entendre in the sense that obviously she's talking about shall we begin begin our tactics on how we're going to win this war, if you like. But I feel that it's also somewhat of a nod to the show in the sense that obviously with it being a shorter season with regard in terms of episodes, usually there's like a 1 or 2 episode build up before the real plots start to take place, and then obviously usually it's around episode 9 when the real climax of the plots takes place. Whereas I feel as though the "Shall we begin" line is sort of hinting or foreshadowing the fact that there's no time to spare anymore. This is going to be huge moments happening on a episodely consistent basis, and there's no room to be building up anymore. It's all going to happen rather quickly.
And I think that would be awesome if you do. Yeah, a lot of people at the small council were in agreement with you there. They sort of came to the same conclusion. I, while still agreeing with you, also took it to mean like this is the part for us book readers now that it begins for us sort of here. This is now we're going to start to get answers to some of the burning, longing questions that we've always had. So the "shall we begin" is like, here you go, now it's coming. And I hope that's the case. But anyways, yeah, DJ, go ahead, because I really don't have much on the Danny thing. Are you already done? Just the hair, eh? And she's had that hair for quite a while too. Like it wasn't just this season. She's had it many seasons.
Yeah. Thinking back, I realize that now.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get to mention the one thing that I actually wanted to mention. And now I don't know where it is. What did I say that word was? Oh, via regia?
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, what is
so
this?
I suppose I should have mentioned it when we were talking about the White Walkers and Beyond the Wall. But for a while now, been trying to get people to see the world of Westeros like sort of I see it as a representation of not only just like the human body or a physical aspect, but what George is trying to go with. Whereas above the wall is like your subconscious, it's your mind, it's thought, and the things in fantasy that aren't real, but they are real above the wall or in your head or anything like that. And once again, I was talking to Eric, and he said, pointed me towards Freud and this via regia, which actually translates to, or I think it translates, it might just be 2 different versions, but it's the King's Road. He writes about the King's Road, and the King's Road is your dreams and your mind. So I think that's a good representation of what George is doing. And I know, DJ, you're talking about the World of Ice and Fire book, and have it on my floor here. And the one map of the known world, when you turn to that page and you see the north, it almost looks like this, or Beyond the Wall, this image of an expanding mind sort of thing of thought. And so I mean, when you look at it as a whole, you have the mind, and then of course you have the neck. You have places like the fingers and the veil. You have the Vale, of course, being sort of like this feminine, fertile place with the moon door, and it's impregnable. And there's a few other things, the Bloody Gate, all that sort of stuff. And then you get to King's Landing, right? Now, this is going to sound a little bit vulgar, but it's the asshole. And it's basically described as that. It smells like shit. Whenever you come down there, they talk about it. Like Olenna can smell it for miles away when she gets there. So he's doing something specific in regards to Westeros in general. Like you have the fingers, you have the God's Eye, and you have all these anatomical parts. But beyond the wall is our subconscious. It's this. I want people to start sort of looking or trying to get that concept of what George is. So think about like repressed memories, which is exactly what the White Walkers are, right?
I fucking love this, by the way.
I know, this is great. A land of pure imagination, Willy Wonka style.
I love this thread that you're going down.
Definitely.
Well, you guys have to talk to Eric sometime because he can explain it a hell of a lot better than me, and he's the one that turned me on to thinking about things like this. But yeah,
it's turning me on as well.
Think about repressed memories, right?
I feel
Which
my
is
King's
exactly
Landing puckering.
what the White Walkers are. Shut up, so I can get to comments. They were something that were known, but they've been pushed back and they've been forgotten about. But they want to make themselves known again, and they're coming back, and they're coming back, and they're going to break through the wall, which is a barrier. It's this divide that we put up, and they're going to come through. And that's why I don't necessarily think that their role is that of an evil force. They appear that way, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, I think it's just this thing. Oh wow, I hear an echo. Anyways, that was essentially it. I just thought it was very cool that Freud, in describing the subconscious, uses the term the King's Road, and George has it there also.
We definitely need to talk.
And by the way, it only runs north-south, north to King's Landing, right? It doesn't go south from King's Landing, which is very interesting. Very interesting to me.
It doesn't go down to Dorne or anything?
No, it stops at King's Landing.
Stops at the ass.
It stops at the ass. It's the digestion. It's the shit. It's poop soup. Mm-hmm. All right, sorry, that was my finish. Thank you guys for bearing with me with that.
Yep, I'm all done as well.
Yep, same.
Guys, I thought you guys did a wonderful job. This was so many excellent points all around. I appreciate it.
And we'll be trying again for next week, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, everybody, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.
Ciao.